Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, my homeowner association sued me for $200,000 for rebuilding my house after a hurricane destroyed it. They claimed we don't have permission. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the story. And the title story starts like this. This is actually a story that happened to my aunt's family, and I got to hear all about it because they were staying with us for a little while during the whole thing. There was a pretty bad hurricane about 5 years ago where she lived, and they even recommended people to evacuate and stuff. Luckily, it kind of moved and mostly ended up going into the ocean. Damages were still crazy though, and I think some places did not even have power restored for a few weeks. My aunt's house did end up damaged and got totally messed up. The entire first floor was flooded and the floors were just horrible. Windows got destroyed and I think some other stuff I don't fully remember. They belong to the HOA, which is not uncommon here, but it was the first time I heard somebody I personally knew complaining about them. So with all the damage, they needed to get the entire house renovated in order to be livable again. We live about an hour away from them, and with one sibling in college and the other recently moved out, we had plenty of space. My cousins and I were all teenagers and got along, so it was a little fun for us to hang out. I heard a lot of what was going on by listening to my aunt and mom talk. I found out years later, but this was the gist of what was going on while they tried to repair the house. So they had hired a contractor and were in the process of getting things fixed. The HOA was trying to halt the construction, claiming that my aunt did not get permission and needed to go through the HOA channels if they wanted to make a home renovation. This was a long process where the HOA could basically just tell them no and not give them a permit in order to do the work. With them being an hour away, the HOA took advantage to constantly slow down the contractors from finishing the work. It did get done though, and about a month later they moved out of our house and back into their new one. This meant I no longer got to hear much of the gossip, but I was curious and asked my mom a couple years later what ended up happening with the whole HOA thing and getting the rest of the story. She told me that after the house was done and they moved back in, the HOA filed a lawsuit against my aunt for over $200,000. Claiming that she didn't get their approval and did things to her home that went against the HOA-approved things. For those wondering why she didn't follow HOA guidelines when it came to what to put in her house, it was because they were totally outdated. The brand of windows, for example, that was HOA-approved was not even being made anymore, so there was no way to get it. By their logic, if you wanted windows, you needed to take them off an old house or just not have any, I guess. The lawsuit was horrible and I didn't know how they could do something like that. My mom explained that while it was about the house, it was actually more than that and they wanted my aunt to simply move out. Now might be a good time to explain that she was a single mom and left her husband many years before. Nobody knows what happened to him, but none of us cared because he was just a bad person and the whole family was glad that she left him. The HOA saw a single mother as being a bad look for the area and wanted her to get out so a more traditional kind of family could move in instead. This was their way to try and legally get her out. With the lawsuit, it didn't seem great since technically she did violate HOA rules by renovating her house without permission. So she had to get a lawyer to dig pretty deep until he found that there was an exception. When damages are caused by a natural disaster, in other words the hurricane, then an HOA approval can be overlooked in order to speed up the process to make the home livable. In basic terms, I guess that meant since the damage was caused by the storm, she did not need to follow the HOA rules and could do whatever she wanted as far as repairing the house. When this was brought up, the HOA was trying to claim that she made changes for things that were not actually damaged and trying to use the law she did not even know existed until afterwards as an excuse to bypass them. My aunt was great at keeping records and was able to prove that the only work done was for the damage. Still, the HOA wanted to push forward with the lawsuit claiming that they were going to have a judge force her out of the house. Instead though, my aunt filed for the court to review the HOA laws and if they were actually within the real law. Specifically the ones regarding home renovations. It turns out that the HOA had spent years doing things the wrong way and the court was not happy about it. They were not allowed to actually have a say in if a renovation could happen or not. What they could do was open it up at a meeting and if a certain number of neighbors objected, it could be questioned. They also did not have the right to say what brands of things to use or even what companies could be used. The entire thing was a mess. So my aunt ended up not needing to pay or leave, which made the HOA furious with her. They were in enough hot water, and I was so excited to find out what happened with them. I must have been reading too many stories because I was expecting them going to jail or losing their house or something. But well, in reality, the HOA was under the investigation for a while and the rules had to be reworked. My mom also mentioned that the entire HOA management changed because of all of this. I'm just happy that they were able to stay in their house despite the people with the old school mentality thinking that they didn't belong here. Hell, I think one of my cousins single-handedly raised the test scores at the local school. You would think the family would have been wanted there even if it was a single-parent household. From the whole thing I learned two important lessons that I want to carry with me as I move into my life and hopefully get a house one day. The first is to get insurance so that if something happens to the house, it can be covered. The second is that if I can avoid living in an HOA, I should take that opportunity because there is a chance it can be trouble for me down the road. However, I forgot to mention, the HOA also had to pay a fine of $30,000 to my aunt's family. However, in the grand scheme of things, this was not a big deal financially for any party involved. I'm glad that the management at least changed, and so far, it seems like the new HOA management is much nicer and there are no more issues. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. I used to live in a posh neighborhood. Big backyards, bigger than necessary mansions, neighbors that held parties for no reason other than they had too much money to spend. It was not Hollywood, but it might as well be with the drama. Not saying that I'm much different, but my parents are self-made, so I was raised with a bit more discipline and strictness than some people here. When the virus hit, my parents were stuck in another country while I attended my college online from our home. I was kind of stuck inside with nothing to do. Well, nothing to do other than deal with the daily shenanigans of our neighborhood Karen. She had moved in with her husband and son a few months ago, before the virus was a threat, and just like me, she was now stuck inside the house with her son as her husband was stuck in another country. Previously, she used to have almost daily fights with her husband, but now it seemed like she had taken up breaking the virus rules as her daily activity. And no, I was not eavesdropping on their fights. She would loudly curse at her husband outside of their house for everyone to hear. Every day I would see her pull out her car and drive somewhere with her son, even during hours that were declared as curfew. She would come back after a few hours and loudly curse at the cops, the government, the Chinese, and whatnot. Basically, she loved to cause problems and then act as the victim. One day, someone knocked on my front door and it turned out it was the Karen whose car had been towed when she was picking up groceries the previous day. I was fully ready to turn her away when she explained that her son, who was leaning against her fully as if he had no strength, needed to go to the hospital for an emergency checkup, and she had no other means of transportation. I hesitated at first, but ultimately I decided to lend her the car, because this could be a situation of life or death and I did not want my mild annoyance with her to affect her son's life. I told her to wait and came back with the keys to my Mercedes, but apparently that was not what the son wanted. Because just as I handed over the keys, Karen's son straightened up and made a face. This 23-year-old adult who was apparently in need of an emergency checkup and whined that he wanted my new car. And this Karen even had the audacity to ask me for the keys to it. I said that if my car is not good enough for them, they could give the keys back because the other car belonged to my parents. Karen then backpedaled and said that it was fine and she understood my reasoning. Now, I know you all must be saying that I should have taken the keys away right then and there, but despite acting like a brat, the son's face was actually looking pretty pale and I did feel bad for him. Anyway, they drive away and I get back to my classes. They returned sometime late at night when I was ready for bed, so I decided to talk to them the next day. Morning rolled around and my Mercedes was still parked in Karen's house, not mine. However, I didn't want to go near their house because of the possibility of them having the virus, so I just decided to wait for a few days and then get back to her. About 2 weeks later, I got up the courage to go and ring on their door, all masked up and wearing a face shield. Nobody answered me and I had to ring the bell like 7 times before I heard Karen shouting at her son to go see who was at the door. The son comes out and as soon as he saw my face, he ran back inside again. After a few more minutes, Karen came out with a smile on her face and thanked me for my help. I asked her if her son had the virus and Karen denied that, saying it was just a cold, but I did not believe her. I then asked her to drive my car back to my garage, to which she replied that she wanted to keep the car for a few more days as her son needed to go to the hospital frequently and she did not want to bother me repeatedly. I was not sure if I wanted to believe her, but then again, it was not like she could run away with the car or something. So I instead asked when she would get her car back, to which she replied, "My husband is working on that." Again, I was not sure if I wanted to believe her. I agreed to let her keep the car for another 2 weeks, but I warned her that if she got my car towed, I would directly call her husband. She looked annoyed at my threat, but nodded nonetheless. I had of course told my parents all about this too and gave them the newest update as well. They asked me to keep an eye on the Karen and tell them if she caused any problems. But it seemed like the only thing this Karen wanted to cause was problems indeed. She continued to drive off at random times of the day with her son and come back late at night. Soon enough, 2 weeks were about to be up and I was losing my patience. Some other neighbors felt the same, as because of our Karen, our neighborhood got the warning to stay inside and not break the pandemic rules. On the 25th day of Karen borrowing my car, I went outside to take out the trash and saw her son driving my car. And by the way guys, I would like to note here already that OP is definitely way too nice and Karen is clearly taking advantage of him. But then again, we don't really know how old OP is, maybe he is younger, so that might explain it a little bit. I rushed over to her house to confront her, but she just shrugged and said that her son was learning to drive and that the car was safer with him than with me. I could not believe the audacity of this woman. That was when I lost my patience and demanded to get my car back. But Karen refused to listen and tried to get back inside her house. When I held her door open, she started shouting at me and even threw a few punches when I shouted back. She became increasingly defensive and aggressive, insisting that her son deserved the car more than I did because I was a wealthy brat anyway. And no offense guys, in this case, I don't think that OP is a brat, but definitely a wealthy doormat, unfortunately. Anyway, what the hell? Karen tried to close the door on my hand, so I let go and instead started walking up to her son, who, upon seeing me, turned the car towards me and accelerated in my direction. I thankfully leaped off, but the son managed to get inside his garage and the Karen closed the gate in my face. I called up my parents and they asked me to stay away from the duo, as they would send the police over for investigation. They also posted about the thief Karen and her psycho son in the neighborhood's Facebook group, along with the footage of the son trying to run me over that was caught on another neighbor's CCTV camera. I only got to know about it when I woke up the next day to Karen banging on my door and demanding that I take down the post that was insulting her. When I told my parents about this, they asked me to relax as police were on their way. So I sat down in our living room eating Pringles as I saw Karen being hoisted away by police. All the while she kicked and screamed and looked like an absolute maniac in front of the entire neighborhood. The police recovered my car from Karen's possession and returned it to me. Karen was forced to pay for the damages her son caused and faced legal consequences for stealing my car, along with spending time in jail, as my parents told me. My parents also told me that Karen's husband had reached out to them after seeing the post. He wanted to apologize for her actions, but also requested to take down the post. It had spread like wildfire in the neighborhood that was hungry for some gossip, and now almost everyone near us was talking about them. I was not sure how genuine the husband was in his apology until the day aircrafts were allowed to fly again and he returned home only to kick Karen and her son out. From all the gossip that I heard on the group, apparently the son was not his own but a stepson instead, and the couple had gotten married only 6 months ago. Talk about failed relationships. At the end, I got back what was mine and Karen was kicked out of our neighborhood for good, along with losing her marriage and the luxurious life she was living. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I gotta say, I really hope that OP learned his lesson and does not allow people like Karen, and especially entitled people in general, to step over him like this anymore. Karen literally used him as a doormat. Let me know what you think about this story in the comments, and while you're at it, please don't forget to like the video, because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much. The next one is titled Property Revenge. When my contractor installed the fence around my property, he made a mistake and went over the property line by 4 centimeters along my neighbor's hedge. When my contractor installed the fence around my property, he made a mistake and went over the property line by 4 centimeters along my neighbor's hedge. My neighbor made a fuss of it and even dragged us to court. We lost, obviously. He was petty, but that's the law. However, we found out today that his dog is amongst the dangerous breeds, so his fence should be 2 meters high with a concrete base all around all of his property. Turns out the current one is just 1.40 meters with no base. And guess what complaint I'm gonna file with the police? I have 3 small kids who like to play in the yard, and he has trained his dog to bark whenever they go outside. He is a heinous guy for real. Edit, I see quite a few people saying I encroached on his land, and to be completely clear, we are talking 4 centimeters in a 10-meter line, so that's 0.4 square meters. Bad math, by the way. My contractor told me he wouldn't move it because that's in the margin of error for plants and it's along a damn hedge. Another edit because I just woke up. Last edit, before I let this die on its own, I was not set on revenge. Like I said, we lost fair and square because the law is the law, but since he always yelled about the law and his rights, what a hypocrite to abstain from mentioning that he is in violation too. So since we were both in violation of property limit law, I'm only making sure that we all end in compliance. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I'm curious what you think about this story. Do you think that OP is in the wrong here technically or not? Or do you think that the neighbor is just being petty for these 4 centimeters? Let me know what you think in the comments. And the next one is titled, Yeah, I'm not single. I am 32 years old, but thanks to a genetic disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, I am typically mistaken for being much younger, sometimes as young as 15 or 18. Depending on what I'm wearing, of course. I also dress in a very goth/punk style and have dealt with an alarming number of creepy grown-ass men who assume I'm a naive and exploitable teenager. While I cannot know for sure how the old man in this story thought I was, we can probably assume young. I was walking through my local mall on my way to get some groceries when this guy came up behind me and tapped me on the shoulder. Because that is a great idea in the middle of a global pandemic. I turned around to see a balding white guy with a legit neckbeard wearing an Evangelion hoodie. He looked to be in his 30s, and with an altogether uncomfortable, enthusiastic grin and a flourish of his hand, he said, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I just had to ask, are you single?" Having already dealt with a Karen not 20 minutes earlier, happy to also share that story if you're interested, I was in no mood to deal with this guy, and with a completely deadpan expression I simply said, no. Not rude or even brusque, just neutral. There was an awkward silence during which his enthusiasm vanished and a scowl replaced it. He huffed and literally shouted, "Well, there's no need to be such a witch," and stormed off barking about how rude and ungrateful I was and how women are all the same. Yeah, Ripe Stars, I don't know how you would judge this situation, but I would say that guy definitely deserves a slap in the face. You know, it kind of reminds me of a real-life situation I recently read about. Here in the north of Thailand, where I live, in Chiang Mai, there is a lake near the university where a lot of students always chill, sit around and so on. And there was a post in one of the Thai student groups where one person complained that she was sitting alone at the lake and suddenly some random foreigner sat down right next to her and started a conversation. Which I guess is not really that bad when you think about it. However, that guy seemed to be much older than this girl who was barely 20, and he then started talking about having a relationship with her and that he wants to have intercourse with her. Obviously, the girl was super scared and did not really know what to do because more often than not, Thai people in this kind of situation don't really know what to say, especially when that person is only speaking English. Either way, thank God at some point that guy fortunately left, but of course that poor scared girl was then posting on Facebook about it, and it kind of gives a bad rep to every other foreigner in the city if you ask me. And I'm not trying to paint all tourists or all expats in a bad light here, but I've seen a couple of these situations play out in real life already as well. And I mean, the worst thing is that some idiots in the comments actually blamed the girl for not instantly telling this guy to piss off, even though she was just sitting there alone minding her own business. But yeah, anyway, let's move on to the next one. It is titled, Don't Fire Me. I used to work at a distribution warehouse, and last summer I got stressed and got depression that was so bad I got anxiety attacks because of it from the bad work environment. It was mainly caused by a specific employee and the CEO. I was having way more sick days than before and got asked for a doctor's note in a meeting between me, the CEO, and the guy who basically ran the company. He was great and seemed concerned about me, while the CEO more seemed annoyed that my sick days were higher than normal for me. So then we filled out the part of the doctor's note that is supposed to be filled by the employee and the company in collaboration, and I booked an appointment with my doctor. He concluded that I had stress and depression that caused me to have anxiety attacks and recommended that I got allowed small breaks for fresh air. Very bad air quality in the warehouse, and that I went down from 35 hours a week to 20. He also recommended that I got therapy. The bill got sent directly to the company, as if they request one, they are the ones to pay per law. I was pretty wound up after the appointment and called them and explained that the bill was being sent to them, and I felt bad after it, so I would be taking the rest of the day off. It was about 2 hours before I usually got off and I had worked before the appointment. They were very understanding and nice. The next day I was working, I talked with the guy I mentioned that actually mainly ran the place about the doctor's note. I will refer to him as Cedric from now on because he is a nice and friendly person. And yes, that's a Harry Potter reference. And by the way, Ripe Stars, if you have already played Hogwarts Legacy, please let me know in the comments because I'm currently playing that game and it's just awesome. But anyway, we agreed that I would have an extra day off so that I only work 2 days in a row between days off, that I would have a longer lunch break to make the math add up, and that I would come in later, which was my idea as I know that's when they are most busy, which I pointed out to him. The CEO was not part of it because he was not in that day. The next Thursday I get called into a meeting with both of them again for Friday. I assumed it was to talk about how it had worked this last week with my adjusted schedule and maybe change it slightly. The CEO was his normal unpleasant self and Cedric seemed unusually silent and uncomfortable. The CEO went through the doctor's note with me, saying he did not understand the part about fresh air. I explained and told him how I felt the new schedule had worked, how much better it already seemed to be for me, despite the only thing having been put in me was me having Wednesday off. He then slid a piece of paper across the desk to me and informed me that I was being fired. I was shocked, read the paper through and signed it since there was nothing else I could do. I was given my copy of it and then they walked with me to the warehouse where it was announced to the others. My boss was just as shocked as me and angry because she liked me and had not been informed. I went home after that and I contacted my union, sending them the copy I had, a copy of my contract, and explained the timeline. I was not working since that day because F them, to be honest. I only came back shortly one day to give back my key and uniform and to say bye to people. I was put on as CC on every email the union employee that worked my case sent to them, and he sent every email the union lawyer sent him to me. Well, a lot of things happened through them that I won't write out in detail, but here's the bullet points. I had not actually been given a proper letter of termination. While the one I was given was legally binding, it was not actually correctly made. My assignments had slowly changed, but my contract hadn't and was now wrong. This meant that instead of 1 month's severance, I was entitled to 3, and as this was agreed on after the 1 month was started, they were put on after that, giving me 4 months of severance pay. Since they didn't actually have a reason to fire me, it was unreasonable dismissal, legal term translated, and we could either get a settlement or take them to court. Basically, since my union is one of the biggest here and quite strong, and the CEO realized that he knew nothing about it, he hired an attorney, a very expensive one, and the company wasn't going very well. The settlement was negotiated between my union and the attorney, and I was then given the choice of either accepting or taking them to court. Through a conversation with the union advisor working my case, I decided to agree to it. The company's attorney was being very slow to sign it, so it would be closed. I suspect the CEO told him due to having to pay it the next payday after it was signed by everyone, which is me, the union employee working my case, the union's lawyer, the CEO, and the company's attorney. And as I mentioned, the company was not doing great. They had actually lost a customer the day before I was fired. In the end, I got paid to be at home for 4 months and got a pretty decent sized settlement for the unreasonable dismissal and the contract not being updated. The CEO also had to state that my position in the company had been dismantled and the assignments had been spread between several employees. This was all mainly because my work had changed so much. I had basically become the assistant manager. Moral of the story, be in a union, have them check your contract and make sure that your contract is not outdated compared to what you do. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I am so happy about the positive outcome for OP, and it also stresses once again how important unions can be. I really feel bad for the workers in countries that don't have unions. I mean, especially in Europe, unions are so common and they are so useful for the most part. I mean, not always, but more often than not, the average worker definitely benefits from them. And the next one is titled, Neighbors Ripped Up All My Plans. My husband and I have been dreaming to homestead together since we met. After a lot of hard work and saving, we finally left the apartment life and got ourselves a 2-acre house so we can start homesteading. We were excited because it already had a decent sized garden with tomatoes, peppers, kale, sweet potatoes, so we closed on the house on Friday. We had to work on the weekend, so when we came back on Monday to move in, some stuff, it was all gone. We think it was the neighbor because they oddly had a chain link fence with a gate that comes into our yard where the garden was. We also saw all the stakes in his backyard. We were heartbroken, but we have no real proof that they did it. Our plan is now to build a privacy wood fence only on the side that faces that neighbor and start from scratch. Which, in a way, it's better so we can plant them our way with a little more organization. Edit, I need to be clear, I'm not trying to start a feud. Obviously, I don't know anything about gardening, which is why I posted this here. I will try to start a conversation with them. I just thought it was weird to have someone come to my property to remove anything, but I see now that it could have been with good intention, so that is what I'm gonna tell myself when I go speak to them. Update, so I made a post about the neighbors ripping up the vegetable garden on my very first house. I had a lot of mixed responses from people thinking I was being entitled to teaching me about gardening, which yes, I don't know anything about, I'm trying to learn, and making me realize they might have done with good intentions and ripped it up because the season is over. Last night though, I saw the woman that lived there outside with a positive mind that they did me a favor, so I went over to introduce myself, and before I could even finish my sentence, she pretty much admitted to removing the vegetable plants because I did not deserve them because we did not plant them. I thanked her for clearing it up for me and walked away. This morning I got a text from the flipper I bought it from. I had texted her because during the whole purchase process, she went on about that garden that was full of vegetables we were about to enjoy. She let me know that those neighbors used to own my property and they sold it to her. They told her she could keep the garden. As they were renovating, they would make sure to just water them, but she said they never saw them come together or tend to anything. I was excited to come and water them because they stopped watering as soon as the offer got accepted and they look droopy. Either way, I am happy with my first house. I'm excited to learn about gardening. I bought some books and will be building the fence and installing cameras. I'm just gonna pretend it never happened and keep to ourselves. It's kind of weird having the previous owners though living next to me. And yeah, Ripe Stars, if you would have been in this situation, I'm curious, would you also have just kept to yourselves and not said anything, or would you have confronted the neighbors that pretty much stole something from your property? Let us know in the comments. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.